We are going to go ahead and get ready to start the meeting. So thanks again to everyone for being here. This is a special meeting of the Early Learning Council. It's Tuesday, August 4th. This is a web meeting, and I will remind everyone the meeting is being recorded and will be available. Just a couple of opening comments and remarks. We are expecting a few more folks to join us as we go, and we'll take a moment and catch them up to speed when that happens. So because we are on a phone and webinar meeting, and we are all not able to see one another, I just want to introduce a couple of meeting protocols that we typically don't need to do. So first and probably most importantly, if you are not speaking, could you please mute your computer or mute your phone, whichever way you're joining the audio, so that we can minimize the background noise. We are getting some feedback on the line, and if you could please mute your computer or your phone, that would really help to minimize that feedback and help us all hear the presenters as we go through the agenda. In addition, since it's able to see everyone, if you want to speak or you want to get in on the conversation for council members, if you could just say your name, and then I'll come back and call on you in the order in which I hear the names, because I will not be able to see people flagging as you typically would in a regular meeting. So I think those are kind of the opening logistics. In terms of the agenda itself, and then we will do roll call. In terms of the agenda itself, council members, we have 3 important action items. We're having this special meeting because these action items were on our agenda for our Tillamook meeting a couple of weeks ago, but due to unforeseen circumstances, we were unable to have a quorum at the time of the agenda when we reached these action items. So we're coming back around, and the 3 action items are these in the order in which we will review them. Funding formula for hubs, the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund, and the principles for making our rules going forward. All of those are action items. We do need to take a vote before the end of the meeting on all of these action items. And what we will do is, for protocol for each of them, there will be a presenter who will give us a brief history and review. And you should have received quite a bit of this in writing in your packet, but we'll ask our presenters to do a bit of a quick review. And then we will move on to discussion and then subsequently a vote. We have one discussion item, presuming we can get through the action items in an expedient fashion, and that is to hear from David Mandell of our staff about the mixed delivery preschool approach based on the legislation that was passed and placed in our care in this legislative session that just adjourned. So all of that on our agenda today, and then we need to be adjourned no later than 11:30. So before we take the roll, council members, is there anything else that you know that we need to cover that is not on the agenda? Okay, one more time, council members, anything else?
So let's go ahead and get started again. Just very briefly, this is a special meeting of the Early Learning Council. We're going to try the roll call again. And before we do, let me just remind, I know we have a few council members who are on the line now for the first time. So let me just remind everyone we have 3 important action items. Meeting that goes until 11:30, and we're going to do those action items first. And the last forum at our Tillamook meeting, we are going to need to take a vote as early as we can on those items. So our protocol will be a bit of a provide some material that is in your packet first, and we'll have some discussion followed by a vote. So let's resume with roll call, and I will start at the top, and still same protocol, ask you to mute your phone line if you are not speaking, or your computer, whichever. minimize. All right, so let's try again. Pam Curtis speaking, and is Harriet on the line with us? Harriet Adair, are you there? Okay, how about Vicki Bishop? Vicki, are you on the line? All right, Martha Brooks, did you get reconnected?
Yes, I did.
Great, thanks, Martha. How about Janet? Are you back with us, Janet? Let me try again in case she's still on mute. Janet, are you on the line with us?
Yes.
There you are.
Could you repeat the phone number? Could you repeat the phone number? I looked online. There's a digit missing.
Oh yes, it's 877-309-2070.
I've got the access code. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Janet. All right. Tim, are you on the line again?
Yes, I am.
Great, thank you. Kali, have you joined us? Is Kali on the line?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Great, thank you. How about Charles? Did you have a chance to join us, Charles?
I am on the line.
Great, thank you. Eva, are you back with us? I think I see her. Eva, are you there?
Yes.
There you are. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, no worries. Krista Root, are you on the line with us?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Krista. I think we do not have Lynn Saxton, but let me double check. Lynn, are you on the line? Okay. How about Terry Tallhofer?
Good morning, Pam. This is Terry.
Great. Thanks, Terry. Erin Kelly Seal is on vacation this week, but I'm going to just double check and make sure that she didn't join us. Erin, are you there? Okay. How about Bobbie Weber? Are you on, Bobbie?
Good morning. Yes.
Thank you so much. Kim, are you with us? Kim Williams? Okay. How about Marlene? Is Marlene Yespa on the line? Okay. And how about Salam? Did Salam have a chance to join us? All right. It sounds like not. All right. So we have a quorum, folks, and we're going to go ahead and proceed with our agenda items. I would ask that if you are not speaking, please mute your line so we can minimize. Let me try that again and see if our echo has gone away. It sounds like not. So could everyone please mute their line? All right, let's give that a try. All right, thank you very much. All right, so council members, again, 3 action items: the funding formula for hubs, which we will take first, the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund, which we will consider second, and principles for our rulemaking going forward, which we will consider third. Those are the action items we must get through in this agenda today, and then we have a discussion item related to the mixed delivery preschool legislation that was placed in our care. And we do need to give, it's not an action item, but we need to give some guidance to staff to get moving on that. So those are our items for today. We're going to start with the funding formula for hubs. Council members, you have quite a bit of information about this in your packet. I would draw your attention to that. And I would call now on David and Megan to give us a bit of a summary of the material that's in your packet. Before we do, though, I'm negligent in saying this is the first time that we've been together as a council. Too bad it's on the phone. But since Governor Brown made Megan Irwin our permanent early learning systems director. So congratulations, Megan. We're super excited, and we'd be doing a happy dance and a conga line if we were meeting together. So maybe we'll do that next time at our September meeting.
Thanks, Pam. Hi, council members. This is Megan speaking. David's going to help me out here on questions if there are any. And apologies that I sound a little bit like Fran Drescher from The Nanny, and I might have to stop while talking to cough. I had a great time in Finland and came back with an incredibly bad cold. So apologies for how that sounds on the phone. But the item in front of you for consideration is to decide how we're going to allocate the funding that's available to hubs now on a formula basis. We had good conversation about this when we were together in Tillamook, and you have the memo that we prepared as staff for you in the materials that went out to you in preparation for this meeting. But just to kind of recap, what you have in front of you are really 4 potential ways to allocate funds to the hubs to make some decisions on. In preparing this for you, we worked with a group of hub executive directors to just kick around the challenge of trying to land on a way to allocate funds to hubs that is fair across the state and accounts for the needs that rural communities have around, sparse populations of people who have really high needs and real challenges of geography and doing the kind of coordinating work that hubs are charged with doing. And then the challenges of more populated communities where there just are really densely populated pockets of folks with high needs and really heavy caseload pressures to deal with. So worked with a group of hub executive directors, kind of just asked them, how would you think about this if you were me? And we came up with the proposals in front of you. Just to recap for you as well, the principles that we kind of used to guide our thinking here, and you have this in your memo, but the way that we allocate funding, we believe, should reinforce our focus on reducing disparities and improving outcomes for children of color and children who live in poverty in our state. The methodology needs to balance the stressors I just spoke about that are faced by rural communities and the different kinds of stressors that are faced by urban communities. The methodology needs to be linked to our metrics that they're responsible for making progress on. It needs to be transparent and based upon publicly available data sources, which is why we landed on using the number of children in the DHS OHA caseload as kind of the way that we will decide how many children live in a community who are at risk. At our last meeting, we talked about some ways that we might be able to add in a population count for undocumented children, since undocumented children don't show up in the DHS OHA caseload. And David is working on doing some work to really find a reliable data source for that information. So that's not reflected in the numbers you're looking at today. It is something that we're working on figuring out how to get a reliable and transparent data source for so that it can become part of that base population. And then the final principle, our methodology should include an incentive structure that rewards hubs for making progress on specific incentive metrics. At the meeting in Tillamook, a couple of council members asked if they could see the financial breakdown for each allocation option. So you have that in your packet that went out to you as well for options 1, 2, and 3. I'm not sure, we had pretty substantive conversation about this already, so I'm not sure what else I need to add by way of color commentary. And in the interest of time, I might just stop and see if there are additional questions that people wanted to ask or things that you wanted to kick around before you took a vote. I will say, I said this at Tillamook as well, the cohort of hub executive directors that I've been working with has a preference toward option 3. They felt like that was the one that struck the right balance between the needs of rural communities and the needs of urban communities without over-preferencing either. And so that's really all I kind of have for you today, since we had conversation about this previously, but happy to take questions or hear folks' thoughts. And if I don't know the answer to a question, David probably does, and vice versa.
Great. Thanks, Megan. So this is Pam. Let's start first, council members, with questions. Are there any questions about what we have in front of us, either from a substantive standpoint or from a process standpoint? Again, because I can't see if you just state your name if you have a question and then state your question.
Hi, Pam. It's Krista. One quick question, and I regret that I wasn't able to participate in the meeting earlier, but could someone provide just a brief overview of the 4-month extension total and how that fits into the overall budget?
David, I'm going to look to you to explain what the 4-month extension is and why that is in here, but yeah, David, why don't you go ahead and just explain that one? It's a contracting nuance.
Right. We, as I think was discussed a little bit last meeting, we're in the situation where the hub contracts currently went through June 30th, and as you know, the legislative session went to July 6th, and we just had the budget finished. So what we were trying to do is create a balance so that hubs could continue with a minimum of interruption the current work that they were doing, while they have an opportunity to plan both how to use the new resources and how to tie those new resources through the work plans that they will be developing to the new hub metrics. So the hub team is working really closely with the hubs. We'll have a big gathering of them on August 13th in Medford to really outline again the funding opportunities, the hub metrics, and help them develop the work plans. But that's a couple-month process to really do that in a thoughtful manner and to really engage community partners. So the extension period is really about making sure that they have at least the resources to continue doing as much as possible what they're doing now with as minimum disruption.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Council members, are there additional questions?
Pam, this is Martha. I have
Yes,
2 questions. One, with the extension of 4 months, does that mean that with this process we're also going to in the future move that to October to offset all the scramble that everybody's having to do, like we're doing in other programs? And number 2, how do you want us to vote on these options? Do you want to take each option, or do you want somebody to make a motion on one option and go from there?
Pam, this is Megan. I can take at least the first question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and for council members that weren't there in Tillamook, I'll just add a little bit of background on this. You notice that a lot of times in our July and August meetings, as staff were coming to you saying, this is what we want to do, and hey, we also need to do an extension because the contracts end on a date that doesn't line up very well with when budgets get passed at the state level and signed. So at the division, we're actually planning to move contract start dates in the future to have our contracts start in October, so that we stop being in this place of contracts expire before the legislative session even ends, and then we and our contractors are in a weird place where we keep having to do these awkward contract extensions, which take a lot of time for us to talk about in this forum, and they take a lot of unnecessary rework behind the scenes. So Martha, these contracts are ones that we will be moving onto that different timetable so that we stop having this mad scramble every 2 years. In terms of how to vote on this, I defer to the chair. It seems like, I don't know if you need to vote on each one, Pam. It seems like you could call for a motion for what the best option is and have folks vote on that.
Yes, that's right. So Martha, we don't need to vote on each option. We need to vote on an overall funding formula. There are several options before us, and I would just entertain a motion on which of these funding formulas council members would like to discuss further, and then we'll see if we've got enough council members in agreement for a vote. And I would request that the motion include a specific reference to the incentive structure, which we asked for last fall and which staff has responded to in this funding formula.
Hey, this is Eva.
Okay, so I heard 2. Eva, go ahead, and then Tim next, please.
Well, I guess I have a technical question around discussion. If there's a motion, can we have council weigh in on their thoughts on each of the proposals, because I am having trouble just wrapping my little brain around it, I guess. And so I want to make sure that I'm understanding, and I'm not even sure what questions to ask.
So Eva, it's Pam. Absolutely. We do not have to have a motion on the floor to have discussion, or when we do have a motion on the floor, we can still discuss multiple options.
Okay, thank you.
Or Pam, if possible, could or would Megan just sort of explain each of the options from her perspective as well, and sort of give some pro and cons, because I always love to hear what Megan sort of thinks.
I would love to hear the trade-offs too, like that's not outlined at all on this thing. So it's, I guess, similar to pros and cons, understanding what are the trade-offs for each.
Okay, so just for the record, that was Charles and Khalees speaking, and I have Tim next to you.
Are you ready for me?
Yeah, ready for you, Tim, and then we'll come back to the request that Charles made.
So I have a question, and I'm also prepared to make a motion. So the question I had really is around the incentives and how that's going to work, because that's an important part of really the principles that we're trying to follow, is to get people incentives to do the work that we're wanting done. So I'd like a little more explanation on the incentives. But I'm prepared to make a motion to adopt the funding formula number 3.
Great, thank you, Tim. So let's answer your question. Let's answer Charles, and then I will call on you to make that motion. So it's Pam speaking. I will start on the incentive piece just by background, particularly for new council members. At our September retreat last year, when we put together our initial strategic plan, and then when we finalized and ratified our plan later in the year, it included a specific action item to have a withhold for the purpose of creating an incentive fund for hubs that were meeting their metrics in their contracts and strategic plans. I see this recommendation by staff as addressing what we asked for in the strategic plan, although what it would require council members is that we come back to that. It's really a skeleton recommendation. We'd have to come back and put some meat on those bones by having some conversation, or even a subgroup conversation around which metrics would we use to measure success related to the incentive funds, for example, and what are the acceptable performance ranges within those metrics, and so on. So this is creating the withhold that we asked for, but we still have a lot more work to do to define what it would mean and how we would measure it. Did that answer your question, Tim?
It at least made me feel better about not fully understanding what we were doing there, that there's still some work yet to be done. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. And I would, staff, we would need to, my understanding is that we would need to have the meat put on these particular bones no later than the first of the year, preferably yet this fall.
So that's Terry, I have a question in the queue.
Yes, go ahead, Terry, and then we're going to come back to Charles' question as well. So go ahead, Terry.
Okay. So my question is about the measure of undocumented children in communities. I think that's a really significant issue for some of the hubs more than other, and we haven't really talked about how, if we don't adopt that today, how we will adopt that, at what point, and that kind of thing. So I have significant concern going forward without that number. So if David maybe could address how we would adopt that later, or.
Great. Thanks, Terry. So I'm going to ask then now David or Megan, Megan if she has a voice left, David if not, to do what was suggested earlier by Charles, which is give us a little bit of pro and con on each of these options, and as you are doing so, perhaps address this issue of undocumented children.
Sure.
I'm wondering if I could just address Terry's question first, because we've been trying to do a little bit of research on that since the council met about a week and a half ago. and it's clearly there's some data challenges in getting there. What we've found so far are some really thoughtful attempts to estimate the population of the undocumented population. However, all those efforts are at the state level, and in order to play a role in allocating resources between hubs, we'd need them at the hub, or at least, at the very least, the county level. And so far in our work, we have not been able to figure out how to get that data, and through the little bit of detective work that we've been able to do in the last week and a half, going back to actually Pew that did this initial analysis, it looks like all those estimates so far have been at the state level. So we have some real work to do, and to be honest, I can't predict how long it's going to take us to resolve that, because it may be quite tricky.
This is Bobbie. I have a clarifying question to follow up. I assume what we are adopting with the options is a principle, and that the numbers we are seeing is a playing out of what that would look like, but that we are not adopting these numbers, and that it's a percentage. At the beginning of every option, it was so much per child at risk and so much in each of those categories. So this seems important, because if you do find a source, then it will affect the numbers that appear in the line, but it won't affect our vote, which is based on how you're getting to the numbers, how much for infrastructure, how much for each of the major goals. I want to verify if I'm correct.
Bobbie, this is Megan. That is correct. The number of kids in the caseload, or the number of kids in the caseload plus undocumented children, when we're able to identify that source, will go up and down. You can almost think about it as like enrollment in a school district, but the way that we allocate the funds should stay consistent. So what you're adopting here is the structure for how we allocate the funds, knowing that numbers of children in the under 5 population do fluctuate over time.
Thank you.
Okay, council members, I'm going to ask Megan and David to walk through then each of the options very briefly. There was a large discussion about this at the Tillamook meeting, and in the interest of time, we're going to need to start moving along. So if we could have you provide that information, and then we will, Tim, I will call on you for your motion.
Great. So this is Megan. Option 1, option 1 and option 2, I will admit, are a little bit hard to distinguish between, so I don't blame folks for trying to understand what the difference between them is. But in option 1, what we basically say is that if we select this option, we're going to create a floor number of children for rural communities with small populations, and that floor carries across each type of funding that's available. So this option provides $100,000 for the biennium to each hub out of the gate. That's $50,000 per year, and then creates that floor of 6,000 children or more for your community. So under coordination funds, they get that $100,000 in base funding, and then they get a per child allocation based on the actual percent of at-risk children in their service area, or 6,000 children if you're in one of the, I think, 6 hubs that we have where the number of children in their service area is less than 6,000. And then that same methodology spreads across the school readiness funds, and the healthy, stable, and attached families funds. And this, in the very first time that I met with the hub executive directors, they all just sort of said, this seems fine out of the gate. Then when they sat with it more, they started to wonder if it didn't actually tilt things too far in the direction of rural communities, and if maybe there were other options or other ways that we could look at trying to come into balance between the needs of rural communities and the needs of urban communities. And that's where option 2 came from, and that's also where option 3 came from. So in option 2, we would provide $100,000 to each hub. That's $50,000 per year of the biennium, and then allocate coordination funds only with that floor in place. But allocate school readiness funds and family stability and health funds based on the actual percentage of kids in the caseload. And then option three would provide $200,000 to each hub. That's $100,000 a year, and then allocates everything else based on the percentage of children in the caseload. So the rest of the coordination funds, all of the school readiness funds, all of the healthy, stable, and attached families funds. One of my bigger concerns in all of this was making sure that we structured the way that we're getting funds to hubs in a way that would allow rural communities to have enough to operate. If we only go based off of the actual number of kids in their communities, it winds up being such a small number of funding that there's no way that I can look at our rural partners with a straight face and ask them to do the work. In the case of our smallest hub, when you go just off of population, they wind up with something like $12,000 a year to try to run their hub. And so we've kind of landed on it. It takes about $100,000 a year to operate a hub and kind of have the infrastructure in place and do the sort of basic coordinating, convening activities that our statute requires them to do. And so we were trying to come up with an option that would allow for that, but then would also allow for folks to get an amount of money that wasn't overly much if you're in a community that serves a really small number of kids, but that have high needs and challenges of geography, and wasn't too little if you're in a community where you're trying to actually move the needle in several really densely populated neighborhoods with a lot of need. And so we went around in circles with ourselves quite a bit on this, with both rural and urban folks weighing in, and just kind of landed on it. It does take about $100,000 a year to operate. If we can get to that, then allocating based on the actual number of kids at risk in a coverage area felt like it could work and would be fair for everybody. And I think you kind of see that play out in the numbers that we provided you when you look across the different options. The spreadsheets that you have in front of you take into account almost all of the funding streams that are available to the hubs. We set the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund aside separately, since the council hasn't yet decided how it wants to allocate those. But you can see in the spreadsheets that you were provided, if the council does decide to allocate those funds to hubs based on the percentage of at-risk children in their area, you can see what additional funding would go to each community using that sort of an allocation methodology. And then you could add that to the total. So it basically goes to option one, starts at, oh, go ahead, Colleen. Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a question now, or should I wait?
No, please do.
My only question, you had mentioned it costs $100,000 to operate. What's the reasoning for then the $200,000? I don't know if you explained it and I just didn't understand, but why would we ever give a base fund of $200,000 if it only costs $100,000? Is that just because you're getting it in advance with the biennium, or?
Well, because we have to figure out how we're going to allocate for the whole biennium. So it's $100,000 a year, $200,000 total for the biennium. And the other one was $150,000 because then it gets offset by sort of the putting that floor in place of $6,000 offsets the need to do that a little bit.
Okay. So in all scenarios, they have the base funding that they need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Megan, it's Krista. I have a question if it's an appropriate time.
Sure.
So council members, this is Pam. Let's get these questions out, and then we're going to need to move, just in the interest of time, to our motion. So go ahead, Krista, and then we'll move to the motion next.
Thank you. My question was in reference to option 3 and the hub coordination amount. Actually, it's the hub coordination amount in total. Is it possible that, or what is the degree of flexibility for those resources? So if a hub decided that perhaps it only cost them, if we went with option 3 and they decided that they really could make it on, say, $80,000 a year or 160 in a biennium, is there flexibility within the structure that they could allocate those resources to more direct service or other kinds of coordination? Is there that kind of thinking in this option?
That's a great question, Krista, and I would look to the council to tell us whether this body is okay with that level of flexibility. I believe there should be. That's why actually there is an option 4 that I didn't mention, which is just decide how we're going to do the percent allocations and then whichever one of the 3 above, and then give the funding to the hubs without splitting it up into specific categories, which would give them maximum flexibility in their spending. My only concern with that, the only con that I see in that, is that may not provide enough transparency to what we're doing to satisfy some of the questions that the legislature continues to have about the hub system. But I do think that we should have a kind of an operating principle here around this is how we allocate funds. These are the metrics that we want you to achieve. And then what you do with the funds to achieve the metrics, I think we should still stay flexible on, or as flexible as possible, since that was the original vision behind the way that the hubs would work.
Thank you. So, Tim, I'm going to call on you. You have a motion?
Yeah, I would move that we support and pass funding option number 3. And then I'd also have a comment about that after, if there's a second.
Okay, great. Thank you. And did your motion include anything about the incentive fund, Tim?
I'm sorry. Yeah, to include the incentive funds as described.
Great. Thank you. Do we have a second for that motion?
I second. Bobbie.
Thank you, Bobbie. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to adopt funding option number 3, along with the incentive fund recommendation or incentive structure recommendation as described in your memo. So we're open now for conversation and discussion. Tim?
So I support this option. I like the idea of sort of that 4th option that you talked about with maximum flexibility, but I think we're not there yet. I think it's important to have some transparency and oversight and expectation as part of the funding. Maybe in the future we get to the point where the hubs are doing great enough work that we can just literally allocate the dollars without this sort of a formula. But I think for now this is a great first step, and it certainly matches a lot of the discussion and intent when I was in the legislature and we talked about this. So I think it was a very well thought through process to come up with a formula.
Great, thank you. So you're clearly requesting the opportunity to revisit how flexible we can be in the future as we establish the culture of expectation here. Thank you. Council members, is there further discussion about this motion?
This is Kelly. I have a comment or question.
Go ahead, Kelly.
So option 3, I guess it's a clarification question. Option 3 means we're not looking at how many kids or who the kids are that are at risk within a community to determine base funding. The big distinction between option 3 is that there's base funding regardless of population that is given to each hub. Is that a correct assessment?
No. In that option, we're saying here's your $100,000 a year, and then the rest of the funds are allocated based on the percentage of children that are in the DHS and OHA caseload in your coverage area. And then when we can figure out how to add in the number of undocumented children, we'll do that as well. And we went with DHS OHA caseload for now because it's the only reliable, transparent data source that gives us an approximation of risk and need in a community. And so all of these options, including option 3, take into account how deep is the need in your community based on the percentage of kids in your population that are part of that caseload.
True, but there's a difference in the coordination funds versus the other two categories for option 3. It sounds like for options 1 and 2, the allocation is based on, for coordination funds specifically, is based on population. For option 3, it sounds like coordination funds are a flat number. Or
no, each
so there's a discrepancy. When I look at the spreadsheets about what's allocated, there is a difference for hub coordination specifically between options 1 and 2 and option 3. And maybe I'm just trying to ascertain the numbers or look different.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer the question except to say that each hub gets and under option 3, $200,000 in base funds and then a per child allocation based on the percent of at-risk children in their area for coordination funds after we fund the $100,000 a year. So that is still taken into consideration under the coordination piece as well as the school readiness and healthy, stable, and attached families piece. So I'm just not sure I understand the question fully.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand why the numbers change in option 3 for the hub coordination from options 1 and 2. I guess that, yeah, so I'm trying to figure out why. I don't know. Do you know why the numbers change then? Why the amount change
the numbers,
when you look at?
They change across every option because the way that we're allocating fluctuates. So
yeah.
They change in option 3 just like they change in all the other ones.
It's more dramatic, and from what I'm observing and what I'm going back and forth between the sheets. But okay, maybe there's no answer. Thank you.
One way to think.
David, go ahead. But
just one way to think of it.
It fluctuates because the numbers change based on which allocation methodology you guys pick.
So each
and the
option,
amount of money changes.
So each option for the coordination funds has a combination of base funds and population-based funds. So what option 3 does is it has a different way of creating the base fund than the other two. It has a base without a floor.
Yeah, that's what I was observing. And if you look at, if I look at the first 3 rows for options 1 and 2, pretty similar for when you look under hub coordination. When you look at option 3, hub coordination, just the first 3 rows, the numbers drop. And so to me, there's something different. Yeah, what I'm trying to understand is why are they dropping? Is it because it's less based on population?
This is Eva. I think, Kelly, is it because of the base population of 6,000? Because options 1 and 2 is not just based on the number of ages 0 to 6 at risk, but it gives everybody a base of at least 6,000 children.
Yes, and that was my first question.
Yeah.
Like that, I guess I didn't articulate it well, but that's what I was trying to understand. That's what I thought to be the case. Okay, so thank you.
So, council members, in the interest of time, we have 2 other equally important conversations to have today, and I'm going to ask us to move along unless there are any burning questions or statements that need to be made at this time.
I do have a question, I guess, going back to like how I was trying to get my head wrapped around it. So originally, when I read through the materials, even in preparation for Tillamook, I thought, oh, option 3 looks really good. But then when I went back and I saw the numbers in our materials for this meeting, I kind of had a hesitation because I'm really worried about the rural communities that have a significant drop because we don't provide that base level of a minimum number of kids served. So I'm just, Commissioner Freeman, I guess I default to you as a rural person. Are we providing a disservice if we go with option 3 to some of the more rural communities?
Would you like me to answer my opinion of that? So my opinion is that is a concern, and it's a valid concern. But I think having the $100,000 a year known is more important than having the $6,000 sort of minimum. And I think that rural hubs can run their operation on the $100,000 a year and then get funded the per child rate, and that will give them an incentive to serve more children. Mm-hmm. My fear is if you did it the other way, it would it wouldn't matter how many kids they were getting to. They'd have no incentive. If they were a long ways from 6,000, they would just sort of stay where they were. So I do think it's a concern, but I think we've struck a good balance. And then, we also have to look at the balance between the urban and rural. And for some great reason, the staff got the right people in the room, and I think they really did come up with a great balance. So I'm, from my perspective, from rural Oregon, I think it creates a great opportunity for this to work. And it creates a great incentive for those rural communities to go the extra mile to find those kids, to get them in, because they're going to represent funding for the program.
This is Bobbie. I'd just like to add in support of option 3. Having served on the metric committee, I find option 3 to be the best support for what we wanted to hold the hubs accountable for, especially in these early years.
Okay, council members, I'm going to call the question in the interest of time. We could spend, I'm sure there are really important conversations we could continue to have here, but in the interest of time, I'm going to need us to move along. So we're going to call the question. The motion on the floor is to adopt funding option number 3, and that includes the incentive structure, which we have to do some more work on, which is described in your meeting packet. So in the interest of time, we're going to try a voice vote. If I can't tell because of the phone meeting, then we'll go to a roll call vote. So all those in favor of the motion on the floor, again, it's option 3 with the instructions, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed?
I'm opposed.
And who is that? I'm sorry?
Ms. Cully.
Okay, thank you, Cully. So with one opposing vote, the motion passes. Thank you very much, council members. And now we're going to shift gears and talk about the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund. Again, you have some material in your packet about this fund. And council members, I will also remind you that we had really in-depth conversation about the setup of this fund at our Pendleton meeting, part of which was a joint meeting with the Board of Education, a little over a year ago. So with that, I will ask David to provide us with some summary of what's gone on to set up this fund and what happened in the legislature.
Helps if I also take myself off mute. I'll try to be brief because I know that we discussed some of this in Tillamook. The Kindergarten Partnership Innovation Fund was originally created by the legislature in 2013 with the goal of building specific partnerships between schools and early learning partners around such things as shared professional development, transitions to kindergarten, and curricular alignment. The Early Learning Council, through a competitive RFP process, awarded 16 grantees the last round. It included a mixture of hubs, school districts, and other organizations as part of that mix. The legislature just recently not only continued the fund, but funded it at a level of $9 million for a little over $9 million for the upcoming biennium. So you received in your packet a memo outlining some of the options as well as a recommendation. So the idea is to sort of both look at how we provide continuity for the work the great work that's already started under under the Kindergarten Partner Innovation Fund, how we provide an opportunity to what are the opportunities to connect it through the work of the hubs, maintaining that emphasis on direct partnerships between early learning partners in elementary and schools, as well as what are the opportunities for communities to engage in strategic planning on resources. I think looking at those considerations, there was a recommendation that Megan made before the Early Learning Council at the Tillamook meeting about having these resources flow through the hubs, but still with all those requirements intact on the local partnerships, and also seeing that as an opportunity, for the current grantees to continue to work with the hubs to continue the projects that have been so far successful and in line with the work of the hubs.
Tim?
Great. Thank you very much, David. We're going to start with questions. Yes, Commissioner Freeman.
So the only question I have about this, and I do think there's been great work done, and I appreciate the fact that we're recognizing that and continuing on. My question is, I know some of the recommended amounts here are less than the previous grant amounts. I don't know what all of them are, so I'm curious if there was anything, as you were thinking about this, about continuing current amounts, or if it was strictly just a new look at it.
We also did look at one other option, and this is something that you could look at, is we did look at some options where there's an adjustment of the numbers so that no hub region ends up with less resources than under the current model or the current grants, and that is an adjustment that we could definitely make.
Like I said, I don't know how far off any of them are as a total. My only concern is if you ask people to sort of start programs and get things going, and they've spent a little bit of time and energy getting up to speed, they've done some of the work, and then we come back in the very next year and dramatically change the amount of funding, how that affects the work that they've done. So if it's not substantial, it's not a big deal. And again, I don't see a comparison between, what the current funding is for the different grants versus what the proposal is.
Brett's actually on the phone with us today, and he's the person who has worked most closely with the Kindergarten Partnership Innovation grantees. So I'm going to see if he's available to help answer that question.
Hi, this is Brett. Good afternoon, everyone. Commissioner Freeman, in response to your question, just looking at these numbers, there are a handful of early learning hubs that come in at a number that is lower than what the allocation was for either the individual grantee or for the region during the 2013-2015 cycle, and those differences are pretty small, relatively speaking. I think the largest one might be on the order of around $50,000. As David mentioned, we had done some running of numbers where basically what we did was in an attempt to ensure that every early learning hub service area in the state retained at least level funding from where they were in 2013-15, basically adjusting, doing like a 1.5% adjustment of the other grant funds, and that allowed us to get to level funding for everyone. So it's really pretty insignificant in terms of what it would take to get back to that point.
So just let me finish, and then I'll put on mute and I'll be quiet. The example that somebody had mentioned to me after the last meeting was that and I'll use the hub. It doesn't matter which one. I won't use the $50,000 one, but I'll use the Douglas County one. It's only down $20,000, and I'm sure we can manage that. But it's down $20,000, and the Multnomah County one is triple what it was before. So I mean, that's sort of the question I had was, what would it cost to have maintained where you were with the other ones, and then put the additional funding that the legislature put forward into the kind of boosting up some of the areas that are now ready to do this work. That, I don't know if the number would have been $100,000 or $60,000, or what the number would be to maintain where we were with what we started, and then put all the new investment in the new areas. That's all I was questioning.
So just, it's Pam, folks, just to summarize, and then we'll go to the next question.
Very quickly, I'm with Commissioner Freeman on those questions. I need those answered as well.
So, folks, hang on just a second, please. It's Pam, and then we'll go to the question that someone is trying to get in on. So, my understanding, Brett, I think we have an answer to the question, but let me just clarify. My understanding of the answer to the question is that if we make a 1.5% adjustment across the board, we can get to, however you say it, do no harm, so to speak, or lose no resource across the board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Martha, Tim, we have an answer. The answer is a 1.5% adjustment will ensure that we have a level funding for all of the hubs. Now, I apologize for interrupting. Who was trying to get in? Please say your name.
So I had a question. This is Kelly again. My question is similar to his in that I don't understand. There's nothing that lays out what the impact of changes for people that are currently invested this year. And I don't know if the 1% adjustment deals with, because there were people that were funded outside of the hubs, what is the impact of this on them? And will they, I guess what I want to ensure to the commissioner's point, that the people that started the work last year continue at least in this next year doing the work that they had set out to do. And because the mechanism is different around money going to the hubs versus directly to some of the organizations, unless I'm understanding it incorrectly, I'm not clear whether or not there will be impact that's negative to any other existing grantees, those that are not hubs.
Thank you, Kali. Are there other questions?
Well, can someone answer that, or?
Yes, Kali, it's Pam. I just want to make sure if we have other similar questions, we can answer them as a group. So are there other questions, Councilman? And we will answer your question. Are there other questions?
This is Eva. This is Eva. So I guess my questions, and I apologize because I thought I had emailed yesterday and then came to my email this morning and was like, oh, look, that's still in draft form. So did we ever get a formal report on the current status of the grantees and where they've succeeded, and like have a formal report on all on the work that's been done or being done?
So I'm going to let staff answer that question, and then maybe staff can also take a shot at answering Kali's question. It's Pam, and then I'm going to put myself in the queue to make a comment as well. So can I, David or Brett, I'm not sure who's appropriate to answer the questions.
Sure, I can take the second question first. So yes, we have been partnering with Portland State University to do an evaluation of the Partnership and Innovation Grant, and I've been working very closely with them throughout the entire grant period. And they're in the process of finalizing their formal evaluation report to us. One thing to note is that the evaluation looks at many of the practices that have taken place under the grant, such as kindergarten transition programs, pretty holistically. And while it certainly offers us some lessons learned and things to build on, it did not include an extensive evaluation of each individual grantee. And I think that's important to understand for how it may be useful in informing decision making and support for early learning hubs going forward around the partnership and innovation work. But I'm really excited about the work that they've done, and they've done phenomenal work in terms of helping us learn about some of the effective practices that are in place, and in terms of supporting the work that I've done in providing technical assistance to grantees throughout the grant period. To Kali's question, in terms, I mean, really what you're getting at is the issue of creating space to continue the strong work and the strong foundations that have been laid in the first year, and building on the successes. And I think that the structure that we're proposing allows us to do that, and allows us to work with early learning hubs and their partners to identify, you know, to kind of take a step back and reflect and say, what was really successful in our region, what's really serving the children and families in our region that we started in 2014-15 that we want to continue. And in the work that I've done communicating with current grantees about, you know, this recommendation that we've made, the two biggest pieces of feedback that I've heard are create a structure that allows us to continue strong work that has been started, which I think we've accomplished, and maintain space for local innovation. So what that means is that, you know, we're not going to be, while we will certainly be working closely with early learning hubs and their partners to provide a level of support to help them align their work with what we know is working in their region and other parts of the state, we're not intending to dictate to them what it needs to look like. The local innovation piece will remain intact.
Can I ask a follow-up question, though, because I don't know that my question was fully answered?
Go ahead, Tilly, and then we'll go to the next person.
Thank you. I'm still not clear. My understanding was that this particular grant also went to organizations outside the hub. Is that correct?
In some cases, yes.
Okay, so for those organizations, and my understanding in some communities, hubs are stronger than others. So that's important that there was money allocated to people outside of the hub structure. And I guess I'm still not clear whether that work will continue, because everything we're talking about is under the hub umbrella. And so for things outside of that, what does it mean for them?
Right. So I think that that's part of the technical assistance and partnership work that we can do as a staff with the early learning hubs and with grantees from the previous grant cycle during the period of time in which hubs are working on their strategic plans going forward. So I have had some initial conversations with people about what it would look like to bring partners together, early learning hubs and grantees from the previous grant cycle, and sit down and say, help the hub understand what they were doing and what they were accomplishing, and how that may fit into a broader regional approach to partnership and innovation.
But so I was wondering, this is Megan. I was wondering if maybe you and David could even share a couple of just some examples of what that might look like. So, for example, in Multnomah County right now, there's 2 KPI grants. There's the one that funds the Community Education Worker Program, which was established under Early Learning Multnomah, and then there's the grant that went to David Douglas.
Right.
How might you? Maybe an example might help folks understand more what that transition would look like. Or up on the North Coast, we have the grant that went to Neocani. And how would it work for that to move under the hub? Like just a little bit more specifics around some of the grantees.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can do that. David, did you have something you want to add before I do that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So for the example in Multnomah County, so the Early Learning Hub, as Megan mentioned, was one of our grantees, as was David Douglas School District. Both, I think, experienced a lot of success, but both had some differences in terms of their approach. So as Megan mentioned, Early Learning Multnomah was focused on funding the community education worker model, and they also funded some shared professional development focused on early childhood positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS. in David Douglas, there was a shared professional development approach as well, but it had a different focus. One of the ways that I think we can approach this moving forward is, as early learning hubs are developing their partnership and innovation plans, bringing partners together. And you know, I'll stop here and note that the school district, David Douglas, and the hub have been coordinating efforts throughout this time. I mean, that was something that we required from the get-go, even if their strategies looked a little bit different. Getting them together and figuring out which pieces of each of their approaches in the previous grant cycle make sense to continue investing in and continuing to support. And one of the things that will be important in that process is that we are not mandating, I certainly wouldn't envision mandating a cookie cutter approach across a hub service area. So while a focus on early childhood PBIS may be appropriate and may be appropriate to continue for the communities that the Early Learning Hub has been working with over the last year, there's no reason why they couldn't continue to do that work, but then also support the professional development work that's taking place in David Douglas, or the family engagement work that's taking place in David Douglas, or has been taking place over the course of the last year. I think that one of the great things about this grant is that it's flexible enough to be funding different strategies in different communities. So that you know, I don't know if that's specific enough, or Megan, or if you or colleagues have additional questions about that. But that's you know, that's
my very specific question is, will they still get money? I guess I'll be explicit. Like, I think there's good work going on that is not funded through the hub. And I want to know that, will this vote say that they will not get the resources that they had gotten last year to continue the work this year? Is it only going to go to the hub? Like, I feel like that's what this vote is, and I want to be very clear about that.
Okay. So one way to think about what we are proposing here is thinking about the hub effectively serving as the grantor for their service area. So there's nothing in this proposal that
who are you calling?
That suggests.
No, he'll be over here in a while. He'll be over here in a while.
I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm sorry. There's nothing in this proposal that suggests that they would not continue to receive funding should they work through the Early Learning Hub. And from my standpoint, I think it makes a lot of sense for the partnership between the hub and the school district to continue. But But again, going back to the piece of feedback that we heard really clearly through the engagement process with grantees, local innovation was really important. So one of our sort of guiding principles for this is we want to work with early learning hubs. We're not going to mandate who they work with, but it does seem to make a lot of sense to continue where strong work and strong foundations have been laid.
Thanks, Brett. This is Pam. I had myself in the queue, so I'm going to do that now, and then we'll see what other council members have to say. And we're going to need to move on this shortly, council members. So, council members, I just wanted to provide a historical point of reference, which may be or maybe not, I don't know, useful in some of the questions that have been happening. So the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund came to the council midway through the last biennium in a way that enabled us to only provide 1 year of funding, even though it was a biennium's amount. And we did so at our Pendleton meeting that I mentioned earlier. And we did so in a way that explicitly acknowledged our concern as a council that we were providing a biennium's worth of resources in 1 year. And we did so at a time that also explicitly indicated, and maybe to your point or one of your questions, Kelly, that we were awarding these grants to a mix of early learning hubs and school districts and ESDs and so on, because we did not have early learning hubs in every portion of the state. Because at that particular point in time, we had less than half of our hubs in place, and so it was not possible to issue these grants through the hubs. we also indicated it was our intention to do so because of the points of local innovation that someone raised earlier, that the reason the hubs were statutorily set up ultimately was to provide the point of local coordination and innovation. And I think had we had hubs everywhere in the state at that point, we would have done it differently, but we did not. So I just wanted to reference that conversation, that set of decisions, and we're sort of in this awkward transition zone that we knew would happen because we had money at the end of the biennium for 1 year, and so we asked, and now I have a question for staff, but we asked staff to be explicit in the contract with these grantees, be they hubs or not hubs, that these resources were limited to 1 year at that time. Did that actually happen? I don't know who to ask that to, David or Brett. Were the grantees explicitly had in their contract these were 1 year grants?
Yes, the June 30, 2015 was built in as the grant termination date for all of the grants, and it was something that we discussed on an ongoing basis via technical assistance webinars that occurred roughly every 6 to 8 weeks throughout the grant period, where there were some technical pieces where I was reminding them what they had to do in terms of spending out their grant by certain dates and things like that, but also just sort of reiterating that and reinforcing the message that they were 1 year grants and that we were awaiting word from the legislature on whether or not funding would continue, and that in the event that funding did continue, we would need to look at process for rolling out those funds in the new biennium. So it was very clear to everyone that these were intended to be 1 year grants, both from the get-go and then throughout the grant period.
Okay, thank you.
This is Eva. I was just going to have one comment. Thanks for the history, Pam, because I think in my late questions via email, I kind of asked for that history. So yeah, I appreciate that, because I remember our discussions as an award team too about things that we preferred, and I think that what we should be mindful of and is like making sure that we always put our intent on the record, and that even in continuing conversations, whether it's with legislature or at the council, that we always, anytime one of these, a grant or RFP or comes up, that we're very clear about our intent and expectations and be consistent about it.
Great, thanks. So council members, I'm mindful of the time, and I know that we're going to start losing a quorum here shortly. So I'm going to ask if there is a motion for this set of recommendations so that we can move forward or not. Yes, go ahead, Tim.
So I would move that we accept the funding formula as presented with the adjustment to make sure that no existing grantee gets less dollars than they're currently getting.
This is the 1.5% adjustment referenced earlier.
Correct.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second that. This is Martha.
Thank you, Martha. Council members, further discussion on this motion?
Could we add the amendment? Could we not have it be limited to the 1% increase and just say that all grantees get the same amount?
I would agree with Kali as well on that one.
So this is Pam. Just a clarification, staff, correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure we don't have, so we all have the same understanding going forward. My understanding of this recommendation is that there's nothing that would preclude existing grantees from receiving grants, but it would be decided or confirmed in their coordination with their local hub, which is not what we are deciding at this moment. We are saying with this motion, at least as I understand it, that we are entrusting the innovation and the good work to the hubs and their community partners together.
And I'll just
so is that
just a point of clarification. So what the 1.5% adjustment would allow is that all current, it would be sufficient funding to allow all current projects in a region, whether they are currently attached to the hub or not, to be ongoing. So that's what's meant by the 1.5% adjustment. I hope that's
the actual decision
okay, thank
about.
you for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't want there to be misunderstanding about what this motion would do. All right, further discussion about the motion, council members. Okay, hearing none, in the interest of time, then I'm going to call the question on this so that we can try to take off.
Hey, Pam, I think I heard somebody try to weigh in just before you said.
That's okay. This was Harriet. Just never mind. Go ahead.
Oh, hi, Harriet. Thank you so much for telling us that you were on the line.
Okay.
All right. All right, so we are just getting ready to vote then on the motion on the floor for the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund. And that motion is to accept the staff recommendation as it is outlined in your packet with the adjustment that would allow for current funding levels for all hubs, their funding would incorporate the amount of current grantees, the dollar amount of the current grantees that are in their hub jurisdiction. Is there any further discussion before I call for the vote then?
I just have, this is Harriet again. My question about that, the dollar amount is, this does not allow for the expansion of anything that was working well to go beyond what it is. I mean, are there sufficient dollars to actually replicate what happened before or not? I'm a little confused about how you build on what you have.
So Harriet, it's Pam. The motion on the floor is the staff motion, a staff recommendation, which is in your packet. So there's an allocation formula that is shown in your, or an estimate, I should say.
I've been listening. I've been on the line for a while. I just got a little confused there at the end as to whether or not by giving the same amount of money to what they had before, including the external grantees that were not necessarily going through the hub, like David Douglas, I just kind of wondered, is there sufficient dollars for David Douglas to do more and Portland to do more and other groups in the Elm community to do more or not? That's what I can't quite figure out based on what I'm looking at in terms of this percentage.
So, yes, thank you so much. So the adjustment amount, it's Pam, the adjustment amount, Harriet, was, so the answer to your specific question related to Multnomah, David Douglas, and so on is yes, there is that much and much more. The adjustment was because there are some of the smaller communities that under this funding formula got less than they got in the current year. And by making a 1.5% adjustment or close to that, we can ensure that everybody has at least the same amount, if not more. So that's the adjustment we were talking about.
All right, thank you. Okay.
Okay, council members, before we have the vote on this, we have some council members who have conflicts of interest on these funds, and I would like to have the opportunity for those council members with a conflict to declare so at this time.
This is Harriet. This is Harriet. I have a conflict because we're one of the grantees right now. PPS is.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Harriet. Are there other council members with a conflict of interest?
This is Tim. I serve on the board, actually the board chair of the hub here. It's not a financial conflict, but it's probably a perceived conflict.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Are there other council members with conflicts for these funds?
So I may be a perceived conflict. I don't know. We have staff participating in the community education worker project, but we have not received any funds directly. Like
thank you.
Our organization. Yeah.
Thank you. Was that Cully? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other council members with conflicts on these funds? All right, thank you. Council members will do the same as before. I'm gonna ask for a voice vote, and then if we can't tell, we will go forward with a roll call vote. So all those in favor of the motion, which again is the staff recommendation, plus the adjustment to allow for a continued service or continued funding level for those jurisdictions that currently have these resources, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? All right, thank you very much. The motion passes. Council members, procedurally, are you able to stay on the line for 7 more minutes?
Yeah.
This is Tim.
I'm sorry, yes, Tim?
I'm assuming that I'm going to follow exactly the same thing because there are like 7,000 kids that disappear from our...
Hi, everyone. I would ask that you place your phone on mute, please, if you're not speaking. Please place your phone on mute. Thank you so much. So I know we are losing Terry. Is there anyone else that we are losing at this moment?
I have to go as well, Charles.
Charles. Anyone else?
This is Tim. I have to get on an airplane to fly around the fires that we're having down here. So I'll be off the phone.
All right. Thank you so much, Tim. So we were losing Tim, Terry, and Charles. Is there anyone else who cannot stay on for 7 more minutes?
I'll stay on until they put me on the plane. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you so much. I just need a quorum to get through the next item. And we still, by my count, staff, we still have a quorum. So we're going to try to get through the next action item, and then we can continue with the discussion, which we don't necessarily need a quorum for. So we have one more action item, council members. This is on the principles for rulemaking, which we've discussed in 2 separate meetings so far. And I'm going to turn it over to Bobbie to summarize and give us the history of what's in your packet. Bobbie, are you still there? You might be on mute. Bobbie, are you still on the line with us? So, Megan, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, I don't know if you're able to pinch hit for Bobbie. I will try to reach her separately.
I can try, and David, I might need you to help me because I have not gotten through any of my emails from when I was out. But I think what is in front of folks is adopting the principles which we discussed last time. And the main point of feedback that came up at the meeting in Tillamook was that the ideas behind the principles were, for the most part, things that folks found pretty agreeable, but that having 19 principles to use as filters for decision making felt like too many things to have to filter your decisions through as it related to rules, and that you wanted to see some consolidation and some refinement of those principles before you would vote on them. And then over the course of the last 2 weeks, a team of staff that work with Bobbie on the committee that she runs have been working to do that refinement. I have to apologize. I was planning to lean heavily on Bobbie for that part of the meeting because I haven't had a chance to get through my emails yet to see what they landed on in terms of refinement. A member of David's team staffs that committee, so he may be able to add a little bit more.
So my understanding of the current proposal is some good work since the Early Learning Council met has been done based on the input to start working to refining and condensing the principles. There is a little bit more work to do on that. However, I think there was the proposal before you was that given the amount of rulemaking that needs to be done and the timeline to allow staff to move forward with researching and beginning the rulemaking process and to use the draft currently available as guidance just to start the preliminary work, knowing that it's not been fully adopted yet. But this was an effort to sort of balance both the need to really allow the Early Learning Council to have a serious conversation about the principles and to really finalize
You know what?
those in a depth way.
From GoToMeeting. My phone says off mute, but somebody else has muted me.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you now, Bobbie. We can hear you now, Bobbie.
We can hear you now, Bobbie.
So I'll hand it over to Bobbie.
Somebody had muted me from the other end. Okay. The only change, everything that Megan and David said is perfect. The only thing I want to add is we've worked really hard that rulemaking does not happen outside of a framework. So I want to, while we're in this process of collapsing the principles in the way that was suggested, but in light of the fact that there is a high level of agreement on the concepts, the new sentence added to the action is staff are directed to work within the concepts embodied in the draft set of principles. So that will allow us to, staff to start working, but to immediately start working within a framework and not go back to staff do whatever they do, and then we go back later and say, but these are the principles that we're going to use in actually considering them. So that, so everything else was perfect.
And Bobbie, this is Megan. My understanding is that this allows members of my team to start doing some of the research and the very preliminary work that gets done in a rules process that can take a long time, but that at no point are we moving forward with any actual decision making until we get the principles kind of finalized, but we're starting some preliminary research work.
I just don't even want them to start without realizing that they're working within the framework, Megan. That's all.
Right.
That's the only thing is, because conceptually the council is I've not heard any substantive disagreement. We had too many. We had some words that were challenging, but the concepts. So just even in the research that the staff work within these concepts.
I agree with that 100%. And I think I just wanted to add an extra clarifying, almost for my own peace of mind, that we're not going to make that that's what we're doing, and we're doing it within the framework, and we're not going to be at decision-making points for a while, and when we make decisions, they'll be made through the finalized framework, because this is doing rules through a principled framework is something that's really personally important to me. And so I want to make sure that what we're moving forward here is in line with and consistent with what we've been saying.
Pam,
and if you feel like it is, Bobbie, then I'm good.
So, council members, are there any questions for Bobbie at this time?
Pam, this is Martha. I have a few.
Yes, go ahead, Martha.
I understand that having the principles is an important thing, and I'm willing to say that at this point we go ahead and let staff base their actions around these principles, but I really am quite firm and concerned at the same time that 19 is too many. I thank you for hearing that. I would suggest that we try to collapse those into 5. I know that may have your eyes rolling, Bobbie, but you know, the overarching bigger concept is more important than, you know, some of the real nitty-gritty. And if we tie ourselves too tightly into principles, we're going to tie our hands and we won't get anything done. So I would encourage that whatever comes back at a somewhat high level so that we can move and maneuver. And then my question is, when do we think that that will be done? Will it be ready by the next regular council meeting?
We've already started the collapsing process. We just weren't able to get it done in time for today's meeting. And you will, I'm waiting to hear how our process of communication is between meetings, but you're going to get plenty of time to see it, and we will be voting on it in September.
Thank you.
Council members, are there additional questions?
Tim.
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
You ready for a motion?
I am ready for a motion.
So I would move to direct the staff to consolidate the principles as presented to the least amount possible with a target of 5, moving forward within the context of the existing presented principles.
This is Martha. I will second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion?
I would just say that I said the target of 5, if it's 7 or whatever, I understand that, but I do like Martha's idea of being concise and not having a bunch of time and effort spent on principles that are similar. If we can get it concise for the staff moving forward, it would be helpful.
Thank you. Bobbie, anything that you want to comment on since this is the work of your group?
I just want to be clear that I'm concerned that if, Tim, this motion includes that staff can start research on the
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the intent is, since everything we're going to do is within the framework of the principles that the council fundamentally agreed upon, really we're talking more on the side of consolidation for efficiencies. I think the staff, as long as they're working within that broader set of principles, is absolutely green lighted to move forward.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Council members, is there further discussion on this topic or this motion? All right. Hearing none, I'm going to call the question. I'm going to ask it in reverse this time. Is there any objection to the motion? Again, the motion is to allow research and other work to continue on the staff part, and then to work to consolidate these principles into a smaller number with a target of 5, and the timeline hopefully is at our September meeting. Any objection to that motion, council members? All right, thank you. Hearing none, the motion passes. Our last item, and we're going to try to do this as rapidly as possible, is sorry.
This is Tim. I got to get off now. Thank you all.
All right, happy flying. Be safe out there.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for staying. So our last item is some conversation and some guidance for staff related to the mixed delivery preschool legislation that was passed in the last session and that landed in our care and guidance. David, can I turn this over to you to provide a summary, and in particular, could you highlight what you need guidance from the council on?
Yes, thank you, and I'll try to be brief. And I think part of it was also just to highlight some of the roles of the council that are actually called out in the legislation. So HB 3380 creates a new mixed delivery preschool model, a model that would allow preschool to be delivered by current Head Start grantees, elementary schools, child care providers, community-based organizations. All programs would have to meet a similar set of standards that would include being rated 4 or 5-star on the QRS. The language also sets up the funds so that they would flow through the early learning hubs, with the early learning hubs responsible for working with their communities to identify providers. So not only is this a really major new initiative, really exciting initiative for the state, this is an initiative where I think it's going to be really important for there to be opportunities, and some of this is, as I mentioned earlier, spelled out explicitly in statute for the Early Learning Council to weigh in about how this process will unfold, how decisions to allocate resources to hubs will be made, decisions on standards. There's also some very specific roles for the council, including helping set salary guidelines for teachers, for creating a system for waivers for teachers who don't currently meet the bachelor's requirement. We're working on, we have a draft of a memo that we can get out to you shortly that outlines some of these major decisions of the council that are identified in the statute, as well as just based on reading of the statute, a preliminary timeline. So I'm imagining that there will already be some opportunities at the September meeting to dive more deeply into this legislation and also begin some of the discussions or decision making that needs to be made to move this forward. We're very excited that the job announcement for the mixed delivery preschool coordinator just went out yesterday, so we're really hoping to make that hire quickly so that we can also have the staff capacity to really work on what's going to be a very important but also really full implementation year between now and when children first enter this new model, September 1st, 2016. Megan, is there anything that you'd like to add on this?
The main thing that has been on my mind is how can we set up a structure so that the council can be involved at every step of the way beyond just us bringing forward things for decision making at meetings, because there's so much significant work that's going to happen really on a daily basis on this one, since it's such a big thing for us to do. So that's a question I have for the council. And one thought I had when we were standing up the hub, there was a ad hoc committee of council members that worked very closely with me and with staff to guide how we were making decisions about the hubs in between council meetings. And is that something that the council would like to think about establishing for the implementation of this piece of legislation? And if we do that, we may want to also think about including a couple of external stakeholders who were important in helping pass the legislation to be part of the thinking about implementation with us.
Thank you very much, both Megan and David. Council members, are there questions or comments or reactions to any of what was just outlined?
This is Martha.
I just want to say thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Martha. I heard Martha first, and then I think that was Khalid. So, Martha, go ahead.
Okay. I have a question on the salary piece. If, David, you could explain that just a little bit, because I know that was different from the original proposal as to what finally passed. And then, second of all, to answer Megan's question on how to include more for this particular process, and I think that's critical and important to put it into, a small committee or one of the standing committees may not be the best process for this, since there are external partners who feel that they really should have some input into this, which I recognize and think that's important. So maybe a broader process. I don't know if I agree with bringing a couple of them in on a committee and maybe having a separate external committee do this, not just one of the subcommittees. And I'm wondering if we need to ask questions of communities as well as the hubs.
Thanks,
Yes.
Martha. Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, so that's just Martha. Yes, we will need to do really broad engagement of communities in the development of this proposal, and more to come on what that looks like.
Thank you.
I have a comment.
Hey,
I have a general comment about how we operate, and my understanding is we always have the ability to bring external partners into a committee or to create a subcommittee that focuses, so we don't have to get, I don't think, my understanding is we don't have to give up our structure in order to be inclusionary.
That's Bobbie, it's Pam, that's absolutely correct. I have Khalid in the queue next.
May I also get in the queue, please?
Yes, was that Eva? I'm sorry, was that Eva?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for, what you laid out in terms of wanting to provide as much information as possible for us as a early learning council to shape this work. And I would second, I really appreciate that, and I really want us to be data informed in our decision making, as well as have a chance to really thoroughly discuss how we make this the best thing it can be. I would second that I think we do need external folks to get involved, and so if there can be guidance for council members in terms of process around that type of engagement, that would be helpful.
Great, thank you, Kali. I have Eva in the queue now.
Thank you. I know that I probably have said this already, but just want to say it again, that because I'm already getting questions from members about the minimum pay requirement and what that means for Head Start, preschool, child care providers, and then in larger businesses like a Head Start or a child care center, if you have you're requiring a higher pay for a teacher, what does that do for setting pay for other workers that are, or employees that are supporting the children as well in their day-to-day activities? So I'm hoping that we can set, is that something that we can look at in the rulemaking? And then I would also like to join the yes, please add other people to the conversation.
Great, thank you very much. All of those details, I think, are really important and yet to come. We're not going to be able to clearly even scratch the surface on them here today. Council members, are there additional comments, questions, or reactions to what has been laid out so far?
Pam, this is Martha. I asked the question about the difference in the salaries between the start of session and what was finally passed.
Oh, thank you, Martha. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, I apologize. We did not get that answered. So, Megan or David, can one of you respond, please?
This is David, and if I'm remembering the full history correctly, the earliest draft of the legislation did have some more specific guidelines based on a sort of ramping up towards current kindergarten teacher salaries, based on sort of moving closer based on a certain percentage over time. The final version of the legislation basically, rather than setting more specific guidelines, looks to the Early Learning Council to establish those guidelines.
Great. Martha, did that answer your question?
It somewhat did, and I think it'll become clearer as we work through this. My question and concern is that we can't actually tell people what salaries to provide, so I'm hoping that we get guideline around that. Am I correct in that thought? Because we couldn't do that for the HFO.
I think this will be something that will, as we develop the process, will be part of the questions that will have to be analyzed and looked at.
Okay, thank you. Then it does answer. Thanks, Pam.
Yep.
Thanks, David.
All right, council members, any other comments, questions, or reactions to this so far? Okay, so I think we've clearly heard council members to Megan's question and thinking about, just as we had kind of a hub, a group to provide hub guidance as we were starting to get ready to roll this out, that was council members and community folk. We're hearing the same sort of thing and a level of interest here. This is a big deal, and so we will have more details coming up, but you've got, I think, staff guidance from this conversation that you were looking for, and clearly lots of interest of council members will look forward to hearing regular updates about how this is moving forward. So with that, we are way over our time. I really appreciate folks hanging in. Apologies all around for the difficulties with the technology, muting people or kicking people off or having having feedback at the beginning. But we were able to get through our agenda today nevertheless, and appreciate your patience with all of that. And I think we are next scheduled to meet in both retreat and a regular meeting in September. Megan, anything that we need to do for the good of the order before we adjourn?
Pam, before that, do we know where that meeting's going to be? Because there was conversation in Tillamook that it might not go to the east side.
I do not know the answer to that, but would turn to Megan or Alyssa if they're still on the line.
Yes, I'm here. There's nothing else for the good of the order. And when I'm actually back from my vacation on Thursday, I'm going to meet with Alyssa to figure out the best location for the retreat to ensure the maximum amount of council member participation. Since we'll be doing, since it's a little bit of a different kind of meeting and it's a strategic planning meeting, we really need everybody to participate. And while we want to get out to Eastern Oregon, we also want to make sure that we have everybody able to participate. So we're doing some work on what that location is going to be.
And the dates have not changed, correct?
The dates haven't changed, nope.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have them in front of me, but can someone just repeat them for the record, the dates in September?
23rd and 24th.
Great, thank you very much. Yes. So 23rd and 24th, location to be determined, but to be scheduled to maximize council member participation. All right, everyone, thank you so much for your patience in getting through the agenda, and we will look forward to seeing you in person in September with lots on our to-do list. Thanks, everyone. We are adjourned.